Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me and see me. Thank you for joining us for our spelling and phonics session this morning. Just to let you know that we are recording this meeting so that people that aren't here can watch it later, or that if you want to rewatch it yourself at any point, we're able to do that. And of course, we've got the chat bar if you want to ask any questions at any point. Mrs. Hardy is online as well, so she might be able to answer some questions as we go along, or Mrs. King or I will answer any left over when we have finished the presentation as well. Equally, if you don't want to ask a question on a recording, feel free to contact us afterwards as well. That's not a problem. Also, just to let you know, we're having our internet replaced at school today, so hopefully it will be fine. But if we cut out at any moment, Mrs. Hardy is ready and waiting to take over whilst we work out a way to come back. Hopefully it will all be absolutely fine. So this morning we're going to look a little bit at how phonics works across the school. So I'm going to pass you to Mrs. King in a moment, who is our new phonics leader this year, and she's going to talk about phonics in early years and Key Stage 1. And then I will talk a bit about how that works in Key Stage 2, because phonics now goes all the way up through to Year 6. So whichever year group your child is in, hopefully all of this will be useful for you. So Mrs. King, over to you. Do you want me to share the presentation?
Yes, please.
There we go.
Okay. Oh, good morning. Right, let me just see if I can click to the first. There we go. Fantastic. So as Mr. Cannon said, I'm going to speak about phonics in early years and Key Stage 1. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat bar, because it might be that your question does get answered as I'm speaking, or if not, we can have a little look at it at the end. This is my first time ever presenting this way, so bear with me. I'm not the most technical, so hopefully we will get through this together. So, biggest question to start with, what is phonics? Sounds. Phonics is the method of teaching. Oh, is that somebody trying to join, Mr. Cannons? Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Phonics is the method of teaching reading through the identification of sounds and graphemes. Graphemes is the letters that are used to write the sound. It is the spelling of the sound on the page, or which set of letters make up that particular sound. So all words are made up of individual sounds. For example, the word mat, we have the sounds a, t, or in the word ship, we have sh, ip, things like that. And that's what we will teach your children to recognize. The graphemes, as I said, is the letters that we use to write that sound. But in our language, there are lots of different ways to say... Lots of different ways to say the same sound. So, for example, in play, you have the AY grapheme, but in cake, there's the split grapheme AE. Lots to learn, but we take it in small steps so that we don't overwhelm your children and teach them too much too soon and confuse them. So we use Read Write Inc because it is a tried and tested approach. It is very successful. It's systematic, which means that they get results really quickly, and they will be able to use the sounds to begin to read and then go on to writing as well. When children know their sounds well, they will be able to blend to read, and then we can give them books which match the level that they're at. And then that means, really importantly, they're going to see themselves as successful readers and writers really early on. Even in our Year R children, they feel really successful and feel really proud of themselves, which is so important. I'm not going to talk too much about reading today, because our wonderful reading lead, Mrs. Hicks, has got a workshop coming up in the afternoon on the 16th of November. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about reading, that would be a useful one to attend later on this month. So starting in Year R, the children will learn 3 sets of sounds. So in Year R, we start with set 1. which is mostly, as you can see here on this chart, single letter sounds. There are some with two sounds, which they will learn as well. Ignore the ones that aren't highlighted at the moment. They will not learn those straight away. And we also use this little character here whose name is Fred. He is our frog that will help us in phonics. When your children are learning their phonics, we will always use the letter sounds. So we won't say F, L. We might say to them the letter name is F, the letter name is L, but we will make it really clear that we are learning the sound. So we're learning F or U, because that's what's ultimately going to help them their writing and their reading. Ian? Sorry, people are just coming in late. We just want to make sure that everybody is in. So if you hear a bleep or anything, that's what that is. Okay. So, yes, pure sounds will help us to read the words. And you might be thinking, well, what on earth is a pure sound? My little girl at home, every so often she shows an interest in a letter. And my poor husband, he's going, oh, yes, fa, la. And I'm going, no, that's not a pure sound. And for him, that's absolute gobbledygook. So there's actually a really useful video that I'm going to try and play you now from the Ruth Miskin training. Ruth Miskin is the lady who created and wrote the Read Write Ink program that we use. It's got a little girl in it who's going to show you how to say the sounds with pure sounds. So hopefully I can get that working now. Mr. Can is going to be my technical assistant. Okay, so I just press play on this now for you to have a watch.
There's no volume at the moment.
Mr. Canners, we've got no sound.
Okay, 1 second. What I might do is put the video link in the chat bar so that everyone can then watch it themselves, if that's okay.
And stop it at 2 minutes.
And stop it at 2 minutes, Mrs. King says.
Yeah.
So I've just put the link in the chat bar. So if you click on that, it should open in your own internet browser at home. And if you watch the first 2 minutes of that and then come back.
Till 15:15. Oh, is that okay? Oh, let me see. Okay, hopefully that was enough time to watch that video. I was going to use it later on in my presentation as well, but we won't do that today. The video does go on to talk about the set 2 and the set 3 sounds, so that might be useful to watch if that's where your child is at with their learning. Mr. Cannons has just told me this will be available after today, so if you want to watch this video another time, or of course you can just find it on YouTube. So yes, pure sounds will help your child to blend the sounds together to make words and read words more easily. So it's really, really important. It takes a little bit of practice. I know for me, it took me a little bit of practice, but it will be really beneficial for your child to make sure you're using those pure sounds. So we then move on to set 2. We get onto that sometimes in year R, and we certainly revisit that in year 1 and year 2. So you can see them here on the chart. They are the ones that are shaded. So now they are more than just one letter. They are 2 or sometimes 3. If they have 2 sounds like A, E, or O, we call those digraphs. They are 2 letters that make 1 sound. Or ones like I or air, they are trigraphs, 3 letters that make 1 sound. I personally like to use that language with the children. I think they feel quite grown up and important when they're saying things like digraph and trigraph, but you may also hear them refer to them as special friends. So they're sounds that always stay together, letters that stay together to make a sound. So what we'll do, hopefully you're somewhere where you can join in. I'm going to just say them. I'll do my turn, your turn, and we'll just practice 4 of those sounds, my turn, then your turn, so you can see how those sound. A, E, I, O. So you can see how we can practice those with the children, and actually they start to recognize those really, really quickly. And once they know all of those set 2 sounds, they will know one way of reading and writing every sound. So they can begin to write and recognize them in books and things like that. In year R and in year 1, they may come home and show you something they've written, and you might look at it initially and think, you've used the wrong spelling. But at school, we would never say that. We wouldn't want to put down their attempt at what they would done, as long as it's phonetically plausible. If it wasn't, we'd maybe sit down with them and have a look at it. But if they've had a really good attempt at writing something and we can see they've used that sound that they've learned, we would be full of praise, because we want to really praise the effort and the fact that they've wanted to do that writing. That's really, really important. And it happens really quickly in year R. Once they start learning those letters and sounds, they do enjoy coming to show you something that they've written. Some children, it takes them slightly longer, but don't worry if your child doesn't come home with tons and tons of writing. They all develop at their own time, and just know that they are all getting some super phonics learning in school. We then move on to set 3. You can see those here on the big chart. They are highlighted. These are alternative ways to write the sounds and to read the sounds. So alternative graphemes. So if you can look 3rd row down, we can see A, the AY, which we learned in set 2. In set 3, they will learn 2 more ways to read that sound. So they will learn the split AE and the AI. So that will help them to read and write words like cake or rain. So as I mentioned in the video on YouTube, there is that little girl going through the set 2 and the set 3 sounds as well. So it might be worth having a little look at that in your own time. Okay, so when they first learn their single letter sounds, they will be presented with a picture. Before we do that in year R, though, currently in year R, they're playing lots of listening and attention games, listening for sounds that they recognize them, and starting to think about the initial sound in a word. So they might think about the word sat, but they'll really just focus on that initial sound at the beginning, the S. But when they do start to learn their set 1 sounds, the children will see a picture. So you can see with the S, there's like a snake, there's a dinosaur for D, for M, there's a little girl with some mountains, and there's an A, the apple for A. There's a big sheet of those, which will be made available to you if you are a Year R parent, or if you're a Year 1 or Year 2 parent who would find this useful, we can make this available to you. This is also all available online as well. If you just Google, Read, Write, Ink. But, if you're struggling to find it, please let us know. So we give them a phrase to help them to learn and remember their sounds. So they might say, for M, that's the first one we will teach them. We would teach them down Maisie, mountain, mountain. So that would help them to form that in the air. They might write it on a board, but it's to help them to initially recognise it while they are learning those first few sounds. Now, when your child moves on away from set 1, if they're doing set 2 or set 3, we wouldn't really want to be using these phrases to help them to write them, to help them to read them. These are to help them to write their sounds. So if they're writing an S or a D, we could help them use these for the formation. But as they move on to set 2 and set 3, I'll come back to that. Set 2 and set 3, they will have picture phrases with a little rhyming phrase that will help them to recognise and read their sound. So in set 2, we've got the A here. So on one side of the card, they would have the digraph, the A, and on the other side would be a picture card with something we can talk about. So we'd sort of talk about how there's 3 children and one's coming along and she's saying, "May I play?" And as we would flip the card back and front, we would say, "May I play?" or A, and that helps the children to really recognise and embed what that sound is and how they would use it in words. You might just be able to make out there are some words along the bottom. We would also, during our phonics session, go through those words with them as well. And the other card there, that's an example of one of the set 3 sounds. So what can I do at home? You're probably thinking, how can I support this? We will do lots of the work in school. We do phonics every day. But at home, the main thing you can do, particularly with those early learners, is make sure you're using those pure sounds, the the ah, not the m and the l and things like that, because that's really going to help your children recognise and learn those sounds and start to be able to read them. If they are further on, they're doing set 2 and set 3, repeating those picture rhymes. Again, this is something we can make available to you if that would be useful, and that will help them to recognise that special friend if they're seeing it in a word or if they're just looking at the word card on its own. And practice lots at home. It might be that you're out and about, you think like, oh, what's that letter there? Or mummy's forgotten. Can you help me? Or, oh, your daddy's really silly. Can you help me remember that? Let them be the teacher. They really, really love things like that. And, practice those sounds as they come home and as your teachers let you know what it is that the children are learning. Just practice, 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 and praise, praise, praise. Praise the effort, even if they're finding it a little bit tricky or if they get it slightly wrong. Praise the effort, because that will really give them the confidence to keep on going and keep on trying. So whilst teaching your children to read sounds, we do also teach them to blend those together to read. I will just touch on this really briefly because, as I mentioned, Mrs. Hicks will be doing a reading workshop later on in the month. But we will use our little Fred frog to help our children to do their phonics and to blend their sounds to read. So we will take some single letter sounds like this, and they will then see something that looks like this. And we use this little guy to help us. So let me show you what that would look like. So we've got Fred, he might be on our shoulder, he might be on our laps, he's somewhere that the children can see him. So they know we're doing some Fred talk. Fred only talks in sounds. So Fred would say, ah, t. And the children would maybe then repeat that. And then together we'd say, ah, t. And we blend that to read mat. So do you want to have a little practice at home? I'll do it first. So I'll say, ah, t, mat. And then if you have a little turn. So you can see how actually taking those 3 sounds, they can then read a word and we can praise them and they've been successful. They're a reader and they might have some other words with the same sounds. We usually start to do what we call word time with our Year R children once they've learned 5 sounds, because then they've got enough to start to build some words. And it's exactly the same when they move on to longer words. So in set 2 and set 3, they would have green word cards like this. They're green, like Fred the Frog is green. So we know we can use Fred Talk to read these words. What we do initially is we would say, can you see a special friend, or can you see a digraph or a trigraph? And we'd identify that. So in spray, they would spot that there's the AY, the A sound. And then we'd say, okay, Fred Talk. And we might say A, then we would blend, spray. If they've learned a sound before and they're just recapping it, we might say to do something called Fred in your head. So we'll show them the card, we'll say Fred in your head, and they'll think about the word in their head. So they're really quietly saying their sounds. And then we'll go 1, 2, 3, push the card forward, and then they can read spray or crawl or whatever the word is. They can also do this with what we call nonsense words or alien words. You can see that that's a word there that you can use your phonics to read, teb, but it's not a word that we know from our language. And this is really important for when we do our phonics screening check, which I will come on to in just a moment. So alongside learning real words, we will teach them nonsense words. So just to recap on Fred Talk, there's our little Fred Frog. We will say the word in sounds to begin with. For example, k, at. We would then say to the children, could they have a go? So it'd be my turn, your turn, but they might jump in. You might say k, at, and they'll go cat. And we wouldn't say, no, do your sounds first. We would say, yes, that's cat. Let's do it again, all together, k, at, cat. We would put the sounds on our fingers. How many sounds are there? 3? Are there 4? 5? Put them on our fingers to help us learn them, then blend to read the word. So lots of repetition, lots of praise, and we can get some really good results really early on. So just before I hand over to Mr. Cannons, I just want to briefly touch on the phonics screening check. If your child is in year 2 or in Key Stage 2, the chances are they've already done this. But for children who are in year 1, this will happen at the end of year 1. It's always with a familiar adult, so it's a really low pressure. It's not presented to like it's a big important test or an exam, but it's just a little job they do with their teacher. They will read 40 words. Half of them are real words, half of them are those nonsense alien words, which is why we make a point to teach those throughout the year so they do recognize them. They might try and turn it into a word that they know, like they might see sheb and they might say shed, because our brain does trick us and think, well, that's not a word, but I know shed is. So it's really important that we say to them, okay, that's a nonsense word, look at the alien, and then they can recognize that. In the phonics screening check, we're not allowed to give them any help, but we find most children actually complete this within 2 to 5 minutes. It's really, really quick, and they need to read 32 words successfully to pass that check. If they don't, that just identifies to us that they need a little bit of extra support in year 2. And also, normally, those children who we've recognised do need a little bit more support. We've recognised that already in year 1, and they might have a little bit of extra phonics throughout their day. We try and do at least 3 times a week with those children, so they're getting all that extra support. It might be you've had this conversation already with your teacher and parents evening, but if you're not sure if your child falls in that group, then just have a word with your teacher and they'll let you know if there's anything else they're doing or anything else that you can do at home. There are some other resources available that you might want to have a look at. So there's a Facebook page. There's lots of free books to read on the Oxford OWL website, and also the Ruth Miskin page. As I mentioned before, Ruth Miskin is the lady who created the Read, Write, Ink program that we use here in school. That is a really useful page as well. So I appreciate I've spoken at you for a really, really long time. I'm just going to check and see if there are any questions. There isn't. I've said lots and lots to you this morning. So if you have any questions, ask your teacher, or please, let me know. So you send an email into the office or chat with your teacher, and I can always get back to you. But hopefully that has been useful for early years and Key Stage 1 parents. I'm going to pass over to Mr. Canners now, who's going to talk about what this looks like in Key Stage 2.
Thank you, Mrs. King. And the good thing about that is that the way we are doing spelling across the school now, all of the things that Mrs. King has just talked about have continued all the way up into Key Stage 2 and up to Year 6. And you might be someone who knows that your child perhaps finds spelling a little bit more tricky. And again, they will probably be having additional phonics across their day at some point as well. Those of you who have older children or who have children who have left the school already will probably have noticed that we have changed spelling in Key Stage 2 quite dramatically over the last couple of years. We've moved away from rote learning spelling patterns, sending home lists of words to learn and then testing that list of words on a Friday. I know I've had a number of parents say to me, "Oh, we haven't had any spellings come home for a while. Should they be learning them for a test on Friday?" The answer to that is no, but I'll talk to you more about how we do that in a moment. So Mrs. King spoke about phonetically plausible spelling. In Key Stage 1, on the whole, as long as a spelling is phonetically plausible, they're using a grapheme that does accurately represent an A sound, for example, then that tends to be okay. As they start to get to the end of Year 2, we would start to be expecting them to use accurate graphemes, the letters, much more frequently. And certainly once they start Key Stage 2, correct spelling of the word is what we start to focus on. As I've said, rote learning spellings in isolation doesn't tend to work that brilliantly. So spelling has been something we've been working on for quite a few years to find the best way for children to progress with spelling. And we found that sending home lists of words and then on a Friday being tested on that list of words and then not looking at those words again actually wasn't the best thing, and they still weren't spelling those words right if you went back to them in 2 weeks' time, for example. So I'll talk to you again in a moment about how we do that now. And I just put a little kind of caveat there. Everything I and Mrs. King have said completely depends on your child's progress. So we have talked a lot about what generally happens in Year 1 or 2, what generally might happen in Year 6. But obviously every child is different. So I might be talking generally about Year 6 in a minute. And you might be a Year 6 parent thinking, well, my child's not at that stage yet. Every child is different, and every teacher will know what it is that your children need to support them in their spelling. And hopefully they will have talked to you about that on Parents' Evening. But just bear in mind that fact as we go through the rest of this morning. So on the screen now, you will be able to see what an average kind of half-termly plan would look like. This is mine from the first half of the autumn term for Year 6. And you will see that every week now, all the way from Year 3 upwards, we focus on a phoneme, so a sound. And it's really useful because it just continues on the phonics learning that they've done in Year 2 and previously to that. We don't suddenly stop phonics and start spelling. It now all feeds into each other. You'll be able to see there that we have in Year 6 different graphemes for the different sounds. A grapheme is just the letters that make up that sound when you write them down. And then we've linked the spelling patterns that are in the curriculum to those sounds as well. And what we're already seeing, we've been doing this for about a year now, a little bit more perhaps. And what we're seeing is that this strategy is really supporting the children in being able to break down unfamiliar spellings, and they are more frequently getting those correct. I know when I first started doing it this way, and I said to Year 6 they needed to start using their sound buttons. If they didn't know their spelling, they need to use spread fingers to break down the word. And they all looked at me like I was absolutely crazy because they hadn't felt like they were using phonics in such a long time. But now it's embedded practice, and every child is much more used to breaking it down into their phonemes, into the sounds that they know. and their mindset is more so that they can tackle unfamiliar words in a better way. And obviously, when you get to year 6 and you're looking at more complicated words, one of those ones I can see there is pediatric. Again, that's not necessarily a word that I would expect them to get right first time, but actually, if they're using a correct grapheme for that sound, then that's what we would hopefully be looking for. So this is an extract from the whole school grapheme overview. So you can see down the side there, we've got the phoneme, the sound, and every year group in school in Key Stage 2 will look at the same sound in the same week. So for example, week 1, everyone in the school should be looking at the A sound. And you can see there that the color coding shows the sounds, how the graphemes progress through the year group. So the yellow is what they would learn in Key Stage 1, part of the set 1, 2, or 3 sounds. And then new graphemes are added on in year 3, which are the red ones, and it gradually builds up to become more and more complicated. And by the time they get to year 6, they will have a whole range of knowledge about the spelling patterns they can use for those words. Obviously, as this hasn't been in place, the strategy hasn't been in place for 4 years. So the years 5s and 6s at the moment may not have every single one of those graphemes taught to them. What it will look like when the new year 3s come up, or the year 3s this year, we will start building it with this progression exactly in mind. But we are gradually building that up as the years go on. This here is an example of some of the words that we might be using that link to those sounds. And the idea is that as the children progress up through the school, they will revisit words perhaps several times within a year, and certainly words that they've visited in previous year groups. And again, that kind of embeds the spelling of that particular word. They feel more confident because they know how to spell that word. And it gives them a more positive attitude towards spelling. Lower Key Stage 2, which is years 3 and 4, and Upper Key Stage 2, which is years 5 and 6, have statutory word lists given by, it's in the curriculum, of words that they need to learn. And they are color coded on our overview. So they will be somewhere in your child's year group spelling planning. And we link those to the sounds that they have in them. So for example, I can see gazing there as a word that they would have to know how to spell. So I would link that to perhaps the A sound when I'm doing that with the children. As I said, they're likely to revisit those many times, and that is good because it embeds learning a little bit more. So I'm going to talk you through what a week of spelling looks like in school. One of the reasons we don't send home lists of spelling spelling on their own anymore is because that we now do spelling every single day. You'll see there on Monday, it's half an hour session, and then the rest of the week it is 15 minutes every day, which is more than they were previously getting in school. So little and often. You might find that some teachers still send words home. Perhaps that might be specifically for your child. Some children have words that are specific focus words for them that might come home. And also you might be using Spelling Shed as well to just practice more words if you want to. But we don't send home a word list on a Monday to be learnt by Friday. So on a Monday, we would give the children a whole set of words with our focus sound in them. You can see here, this is an example from year 6. And you can see again, it is the A sound. And they're given quite a few words, normally between 20 and 25. And these will encompass a whole range of difficulty levels. So it won't just be in year 6, for example, year 6 level words, because not every child in year 6 is going to be able to spell vertebrae or accommodate. And this is a whole class way of teaching spelling. We no longer, in whole class spelling sessions, split up into different groups in Key Stage 2. This is accessible to everyone in the class because of the range of words we have in them. What the children need to do, first of all, when they get that grid, is to see if they can identify the common grapheme, the common phoneme, I should say, between all of the words, and see if there are any that don't fit in. And that's where you can examine your spelling patterns. you can see there, there's a whole range of graphemes for the A sound. And I would expect the children, by the time they get to year 6, to be able to identify those. Obviously, when you are in year 3 or year 4, the range of graphemes isn't quite as vast in the list of words they get. That kind of links back to the overview I showed you a moment ago. And then the children can look at those words and sort them into columns, depending on the grapheme. And you can see there that a kind of extension to that is to add their own words that fit those spelling patterns. So again, it's drawing on their previous knowledge. This is also an opportunity to talk about spelling patterns. So what happens if you have an A at the end of the word? Does it change if it's in the middle of the word? And also a really good chance to discuss prefixes and suffixes as well, as well as their meanings. On a Wednesday, so that was Monday and Tuesday I just talked about there. On a Wednesday, we go back to sound buttons. Some teachers on a Monday as well like to encourage the children to sort the words using their sound buttons. So in some year groups, depending on the need of the children, they'll use those twice every week. And again, it encourages them to break down the word and identify the different phonemes within the same word. And it doesn't let them kind of view the word as a whole, which is when sometimes spelling becomes tricky. It forces them to break it down into sounds that they know. And again, as you go higher up the school, the words get more and more tricky. As Mrs. King said, in Key Stage 1, they're very used to seeing words on green cards, and we know that those words can be broken down very easily. Not always the case when you're getting more complicated words as we go through the school. So we don't kind of mark the sound buttons as we go up through the school. What we're looking for with that skill is that they have identified clear graphemes. So you can see railway in that example there. They have underlined the AI grapheme for the A sound. So I can see that they have broken that word down carefully. And again, this draws on all of the phonic knowledge that they have learnt in Key Stage 1. We also use that as a chance to practice their handwriting. So you can see an example there on the right of handwriting lines that we would encourage them to use. I'll talk more about this in my writing workshop next week. But some children might then use paper that looks like that in their English books, again, to continue that thread and link with the spellings that they have learnt. These are the kind of spellings that they would be kind of assessed on in their writing as well. So if we're doing A as a grapheme, as a phoneme 1 week, in their writing lessons, I would be particularly looking for words that have that sound in them and checking that they've spelt those correctly. So it kind of gives a focus to their English work as well. Now, on a Thursday, they would be doing an oral sound sort. That is the AURAL version, which means that they have to listen to the word and then write it down based on the grapheme they know it has for the focus sound. And that kind of is the opposite to what they need to do on Monday. So on Monday, they can read the word and write it down in the correct place. On a Thursday, they would listen to someone saying the word and need to sort it that way. And that might be a partner, it might be the teacher. The various year groups organise that in a different way. But the skill there is being able to hear what someone's saying, identify the sounds kind of without seeing them written down, and then sort them in that way. That kind of gives them more of an opportunity to match the graphemes to the phonemes they hear without kind of having them in front of them already. And that's kind of the skill that will help them when they get to their writing as well, because when we do writing, we don't give them, all of the words they need for a story that they just have to organize into the right order. They think or hear of words they want to use and have to write them down from their kind of mental phonic knowledge. So this is the skill that is trying to work towards. And then on a Friday, this would previously have been when they would have been tested on their kind of set of words they've been sent home. We don't do that anymore. We do dictation instead. And we would give them a sentence that they need to write down. And that sentence would include a couple of words with a couple of graphemes based on the sound of the week. So there's normally only 4 or 5 sentences that they need to write down. But that, again, builds up their stamina for listening and then writing. And it also encourages them to understand the meanings of the words within a context as well. So on a Monday, we will always talk through all of the words and what they mean. And then on a Friday, it's a really good opportunity to check that they know what they mean. Also really useful with homophones, so words that sound the same but are spelt differently, like there, and there, your and your. It's a really good opportunity to see, based on the context of the sentence, whether the children are able to understand which spelling to go with there. It's important to note here as well that we don't mark the entire word. So we still assess these dictations based on the correct grapheme use, but we don't say, right, the word guard, have you spelled the entire word correctly? What the children are getting the mark for is whether they've selected the correct grapheme for the sound we've been working on that week. That might differ slightly if, for example, it is a statutory Key Stage 2 word that they have to know the whole spelling of. That might be, they might get the mark for the entire spelling there. So this is kind of a little bit old now. This is from last year, but actually it's a really good kind of indicator of why some children might be finding spelling a little bit more difficult. So obviously, as of the end of last year, the Year 6s had their last uninterrupted school year in Year 3. So there is a huge gap there where they would have been having phonics and spelling every single day that they obviously haven't had. So as a general trend, and this is national, this isn't just at Colden Common, this is across Hampshire and across the rest of the country, we have seen a dip in spelling accuracy and phonic knowledge. And as I say, it's because they have not had as much of the teaching as they would have otherwise had. But as I say, we're hoping to build that up through this kind of revisiting of phonic knowledge all the way up through to Year 6. So I'm just going to whiz through some writing examples now from Year 1 upwards, when we'd start to expect to see sentences being written, and just kind of hopefully to give you some idea of what an average child in that year group might write. And as I've said already, this is different for every child. And if we say at Parents' Evening, your child is great depth or your child is meeting age-related expectations, those things are a spectrum as well. So if I'm showing you an age-related expectations piece of work, not every child who is working at that level will have work that looks exactly the same. But these will hopefully illustrate the kind of things you would be expected to be seeing. So all of the work I'm about to show you is age-related as of the autumn term. So it is where we would expect an average child in that year group to be working at that time. So here's an extract from a Year 1 piece of work. As you can see, it is largely phonetic, which is good. It shows that they have got really strong knowledge of the Set 1 and Set 2 sounds. Hopefully you can see from that piece of writing what they are trying to write. To me, it's quite clear that they know exactly what they're trying to write, and they've got the knowledge to represent that on the page in a way that makes sense to other people. So in this instance, we wouldn't be correcting the spelling if they have used a grapheme that does make, the I sound. So you can see the word ice in the middle there, or IC in the middle there. I wouldn't be correcting that spelling. They've learned that IGH is a grapheme for I. They have applied that correctly in a word that has that sound in it. So that is kind of where we would expect them to be. Year 2, it starts to get a little bit more complicated in Year 2 because it's kind of the transition from being purely phonics focused to when the spelling patterns start coming into the curriculum. So Year 2 tends to be split a little bit more, with some children focusing on revisiting the Set 1 and Set 2 sounds, while some Year 2s you'll find are starting to follow the Key Stage 2 format of a sound a week, and linking the spelling patterns to that. You can see here spelling rules start to creep in, so we'll be looking for correct suffixes such as ing and ed, and those are the words that we would start to be correcting. You can see at the top there that this child has spelt about with an OW in the middle. We know that the correct grapheme for that is OU, but again, in this instance, depending on the child, I might say That's the correct sound. What other sounds could go, what other graphemes could go in there to make that sound? If the child was, pushing towards a greater depth standard, I'd be saying correct sound, but now go and find the correct grapheme to represent that. So again, it depends on the child, but that is a typical kind of spelling you would see at a year 2 level. It's worth saying as well, the phonics chart that Mrs. King showed you quite near to the beginning of the meeting, every classroom either has those up on the wall or out on the table all the way up to year 6. So children can refer to those all the time should they need them. Year 3 is a bit of a step up from Key Stage 1 because we would start to expect more accurate spelling. We would start to expect the kind of phonetically plausible but incorrect spelling slowly start to disappear. That doesn't happen overnight, and it sometimes doesn't happen in that year group. But that's when teachers would start to encourage children to go back and have another look at a word if they have spelt it incorrectly. Again, it depends on the difficulty of the word. So if it is a year 3 level word, then those are the words we'd be expecting them to go and change. If they have used a piece of vocabulary that is, exciting, challenging, but they've spelt it incorrectly, we wouldn't necessarily pick up on that because we don't want to stop them from using that exciting vocabulary. And those are the kind of words where we'd be expecting the correct sound to be used, but potentially not quite the right grapheme at that point. Year 4, again, usually in year 4, there are children who still might need phonics gaps plugged. So they might spend some time doing phonics groups in addition to their daily spelling, or in some cases, it might be instead of their daily spelling, depending on where they are within their progress. And again, here, we wouldn't really be expecting high frequency words, year 3, 4 level words to be spelled incorrectly. We would, again, be expecting them to use the resources they have around them to be able to check what the spelling is for those words. And again, in year 3 to year 6, they have the statutory word list on their tables as well, so they can use those to help them spell correctly. It is worth saying that when we come to assessing writing and the spelling within the writing, it doesn't matter if they've got the spelling wrong the first time. If they have been able to go back and identify that as an incorrect spelling and then correct it themselves, that still counts as spelling it independently and correctly. Which is why when you look through their books, you'll usually see a variety of colours of biro that they've used. That's to show us or anyone who wishes to look at their book that they have edited that themselves and it's not a teacher who's told them how to spell that word. But as long as they have the strategies to be able to identify an incorrect spelling and check it, that is okay. Once they get to year 5, we'd be expecting certainly dictionary use to check spelling before they write it down. Doesn't always happen, so I'm sure I'll have spoken to a few of you before about the fact that we often have to prod children. As with anything, if they're not in the habit of using it all the time, then they take a bit of prodding to make that happen. And we also here are really pushing them with the vocabulary they're using. So it's usual once they get to year 5 and certainly year 6 that you might see a little dip in spelling because we're pushing them to use such complicated vocabulary. And naturally, if you go from being told you can use the word sad as a really good adjective in year 2 to suddenly being told you now have to use the word devastated, you're not suddenly going to be able to spell that correctly. So again, it's a gradual process of breaking down the word into the phonemes, applying the correct phonemes that they know that make that sound. Again, here, spelling should be largely accurate. So on this piece of year 5 work, if you look down the bottom there, I've circled a word that hasn't used ED at the end. It's used just the letter D. As I said before, that's a year 2 spelling pattern, an ED ending on a past tense verb. So we would be expecting them to go and change that themselves. And that is the kind of spelling I would be picking up. Whereas if you look at whimpering, a little bit above that, I've underlined that in red, not spelt correctly. So depending on the child, I might underline that as a spelling they need to have another look at. But actually, that's not one that I'm going to be cross that they haven't spelt correctly because they've used the word whimpering rather than a less exciting word. and they've still used graphemes that do represent those spellings, those phonemes correctly. Then we get to year 6, and obviously we are at the end of year 6. They should know all of the graphemes that make up a phoneme, and be able to apply those in their writing. Often, as we start year 6, we've had the summer break. You again see a dip in spelling, and as they get back into the habit of that and back into the habit of checking their work, spelling then tends to increase as we go through the year. As I've said before, if they're using really complicated language, we wouldn't want to stop them using that. And also, as with any year group, we wouldn't want to underline every single incorrect spelling in their work. I know I've got a few children, I always have a few children that find spelling really tricky. And if I underlined every spelling that was incorrect in their work, every other word would be underlined, and they're going to open their English book and then have a breakdown because they think they're terrible, which is completely the opposite of what we want them to do. So we'd again go back to perhaps the sound of the week, identify those particular words in their work that haven't been spelt right, and they can use then perhaps their spelling book or the phonemes and graphemes that they have looked at already, to be able to correct those. By year 6, we kind of be expecting really knowledgeable attempts at being able to spell those longer words. So we'd be expecting more accuracy than earlier in Key Stage 2. But again, we wouldn't want to stop them using exciting vocabulary in their writing. Obviously, when we get to year 6 as well, the spelling is assessed by a SATS test. But a SATS test, again, assesses spelling patterns all the way from year 3 all the way up to year 6. So it shouldn't be the case of a year 6 sitting a SATS paper and not knowing any of the spellings at all. But again, talk to your teacher about that if you are worried in any case. I won't dwell on that. I've talked about that a little bit already. We wouldn't be picking up on every little spelling that's incorrect. We would focus on what are the priorities, which would generally be the focus sound of that week. This was a year 5 piece of writing from a couple of years ago, and you can see there they have tried to write "if it could have been," but they've written "could have been." I'm going to pick up the word "of been," rather than pick up a word like "swallowed" that's incorrectly, because if they're not spelling "been" correctly, that's showing that they perhaps haven't got the phonic knowledge needed to be able to spell the longer words. So again, it's about knowing the individual child and what is appropriate for them. As I've said already, Spelling Shed can be used if you're worried about spelling at home. Spelling Shed has lots of great games for children to practice their spellings. Sometimes teachers will set specific words on there, but if not, they have word lists specific to each year group, all the way down to year 1. And there is also Phonics Shed for early years parents, which does the same sort of thing. And it's just a really nice opportunity for them to practice spellings in a game-like format. All the children should have Spelling Shed logins. So if you haven't received one of those, please check with your class teacher and they can be sent out. So in terms of what you can do at home to support, question that I'm asked all the time, it is knowing where your child is at, which is hopefully coming from your class teacher at Parents' Evening. I know any teacher will be happy for you to get in touch with them to just ask about it if you wanted them to. The main thing at home is to encourage them to proofread their writing if they are spelling, because often they'll rush through a piece of writing without focusing on the spelling themselves, because there's so much to think about when you're trying to create a piece of writing that spelling sometimes slips off. So the most important and probably easiest thing at home for you to do is just encourage them to slow down, go back and check the spelling, perhaps a sentence at a time or a paragraph at a time, before they rush on to something else. Reading a lot as well is also really important, because it will expose them to a variety of language choices. And again, if they've read a word many times in a book, that will give them more of a chance of being able to spell it correctly when they are writing it themselves. So kind of a whistle-stop tour there. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat. There aren't at the moment. Oh, Mrs. Hardy has said Note that reading is regularly is a very good support for spelling, which is why we encourage reading daily throughout the holidays. So I've just kind of spoken about that slightly, briefly, because as much reading as possible will not only help their spelling, but it will really help when it comes to creating a piece of writing as well. So as much reading as humanly possible has all kinds of benefits, which again, I'm sure Mrs. Hicks will talk about in much more detail when she does her workshop in a few weeks' time. So just as a quick reminder, next Tuesday, I've got the writing workshop where I will talk a bit more about our expectations with writing across the school. That will be again from year R all the way up to year 6. And then on the 16th of November, Mrs. Hicks has got her reading workshop as well. All of these will hopefully be able to be shared either on the website or send around a parent mail once all of the meetings have taken place. So that you can have the PowerPoints and the resources as well. As I said, feel free to contact us with any questions you have. Hopefully you found it useful. I know we've shared a lot of information in quite a short amount of time, and it's been quite generic. So again, if you're concerned about your child's spelling, please do talk to your child's class teacher, and they should be able to give you, kind of precise information that will support your child with what they need to do. So unless anyone is going to type anything in the chat now, I will say goodbye and thank you for attending.